big rubber baits. Guys, these catch monster muskies. You got giant medusas, you got giant bulldogs, you got small bulldogs, big, yeah, everything. There's so many, and you've checked them out before, I'm sure, at the muskieshop.com. But today we're going to talk about how to catch more muskies using rubber jerk baits. So the trend for a lot of years in muskie fishing is we had just simply pull pause baits. So we had our primaries. We had our bulldogs, and we'd have our medusas. These were kind of the beginning stages of what's modern muskie angling right now as far as rubber presentations. But now there's a lot of options. We have companies like Toothy Tough, Savage Gear that are in the game, and we have some different presentations from, say, like Red October and Livingston Lures, where you have tube style baits with like the Red October monster tubes, and you have the Livingston Lures Kraken. So I'm going to show you not only how to work these, but let's talk first about the equipment we're going to need to effectively fish these baits. So at the end of the day, a lure is simply a tool. So a tool is only as good as the hand that wields it, and as well, you have to have the right tools to implement these in your fishing game plan. So tackle matters. You can use some of the smaller baits on smaller setups, but if you're gonna throw monster rubber, you're gonna throw standard size rubber, the mid-level and up, we need a serious setup to be able to contend with these, and also too, importantly, lower our fatigue. So right now, my primary setup, this is the Lexa. This is the new 500 series from Daiwa. It's a big profile reel. It's not gigantic in comparison, but it's a bigger profile reel with a quick gear ratio, really nice power handle. So you have a ton of spool capacity here, really good drag that allows you to fight big fish, as well as the spool speed to appropriately work big rubber presentations. I've got that paired up with my Musky Shop shield rod. This is the 9.6 model in heavy. You can go with extra heavy depending. If we get into some of the monster, like I was holding up there a second ago, some of the very, very big presentation, the extra heavy rod can be helpful, but you can get away with a heavy action shield rod for just about all your big rubber presentations. Importantly is leader selection. So when it comes to just about any bait, you can get away with most leaders, but I find that 130-pound fluorocarbon leader for the Musky Shop, this is the 12-inch version. You can do 12 or 18 inches. It's going to be your best action with big rubber baits. So away from, say, like a straight wire leader, which will work, a good fluorocarbon leader like the Musky Shop leader has a high-quality swivel on it, a quality snap here, and it has flexibility. And we'll get into why flexibility matters here in just a few, but having flexibility in your leader material for rubber presentations is pretty important because it allows the bait to fall off at different angles. So it's important to have that right setup. Like I said, quick pickup reel. This is a 7-to-1 gear ratio. It's pretty speedy. You can get away with a 6.3, but you're going to be reeling even more. If you're in a high octane, if you will, presentation style where we're really moving rubber baits at a quick speed, that's going to help alleviate fatigue for you. So with so many rubber baits on the muskie market, where does one begin? How do we know what to throw, when to throw it? It's a question that comes up all the time. How does one pick between, say, a bulldog and a medusa, or a toothy tough, or we've got quad dogs laying here. There's so many options here. So if we take and unfurl these guys, they love to grab each other's hooks. Bulldog and Medusa. This is an alpha dog, which is exclusive to the Musky Shop. It's got an extra big tail on it. But, why do we pick a bulldog or Medusa? It's a matter of running depth. So we can't pick, say, like this pounder-sized bulldog versus the mega Medusa. We're going to have differences in running depth, and we're going to have differences in what they do in the water. So one rubber bait is not transferable to another. They all have their pros and cons, and more importantly, their appropriate applications. So something to look at, and we'll break this down real quick on, say, a Medusa. You have a lot more surface area here on the bottom of this bait. It's going to hang a little longer. When we pull this bait through the water, that area is going to hang a bit more. Tails on a bait. This has multiple tails. The additional tails are more surface area. The more surface area it has, the more hydrodynamic resistance it has subsurface. Where a bulldog, slightly smaller profile if we compare, similar sizes. It tapers out quicker, has a thinner section here. And the singular tail, which is a little less surface area if we're going on a 1-to-1 comparison of big size baits. that actually translates as well when we get into our more standard size baits. What most people throw typically, you know, everybody loves to look at gigantic musky baits, but most people are throwing typical size, standard sizes. That translates just as well over to the standard size bulldog and a standard size Medusa here, where the surface area is greater, there's more tail resistance as like from a hydrodynamic standpoint, where it's creating resistance. So this bait is going to hang a bit more. It's going to have a more flatter fall, right? Where the bulldog's going to have a slightly more vertical fall. Now, when does that matter? That's a situation that you have to let the muskies tell you which they want. You'll find that there are preferences on different bodies of water where they tend to go for Medusas over bulldogs, or they want a toothy top or something of that nature. The easiest way, though, to dissect this, to understand how to make an appropriate selection, is a firm grasp on the structure and cover that we're fishing. So cover and structure they're exclusive from one another. You know, weeds are not structure, whereas timber's not structure, but the actual bathymetry, the topography of the lake is structure. So that structure could be an edge that falls off and it's an aggressive edge. And due to seasonality, we think muskies are staged somewhere, say 8 feet, and we need to get there with a fast retrieve. A more aggressive falling bait like a bulldog might be more apt. If we need a little more hang time and it's not as an aggressive an edge, a Medusa might be the right situational bait. So we want to make our decisions based upon the cover and structure. Everyone in the musky habitat range is fishing different scenarios. So you can check out how to structure musky fish. I wrote the book on it. It's called Next Level Musky Fishing, available at the Musky Shop. To delve deeper in that as well, there's a lot of information on the Musky 360 podcast about this subject. So if you're having a hard time locating muskies, so you need to find muskies and you need to understand what they're doing seasonally and what they're doing with cover and structure, check out the book and check out the podcast. It'll help you dial in, as well as a couple other great videos we have here at the shop. So moving forward on past selection, to me, if we're past the seasonality, past the structural equation, it becomes a running depth aspect. So why I mentioned the surface here. So if I need a bait that's going to get to depth quicker, right, in the same size profile, I'm probably going to go standard bulldog versus the standard Medusa. And so it's not a 1-for-1. It's not as if Medusas run way shallower than this bulldog. It's not a great a disparagement between the two because the weighting's pretty similar. However, I find that I'm able to personally get more strikes in deeper scenarios with bulldogs, whereas the Medusas I typically run, again, a personal preference, in shallower cover, shallower structure settings. So you're going to have to make that assessment on your own, what's going to be appropriate. But obviously, a next big question that comes into this is size. How do we know? How do we pick from the little one to you know, pounder alpha dog? How do we make this jump? How do we make the selection between, you know, same colors, same? Why would I throw this versus that? Well, earlier in the season, it's pretty common knowledge, muskies tend to go for smaller presentations. So we're going to start off with small rubber, and towards the end of the year or towards ice up, we're moving up to the big stuff. Now, big stuff can come into play as early as, I'd say, a couple weeks after the spawn's complete, after muskies are recuperated. So it's not a matter of, oh, I need to make this switch in the middle of summer. But you can never go wrong with smaller presentations just in the beginning of the season. Again, we're moving up in size class across the board. You should consider, however, I would not consider throwing this on a body of water that's not known for big fish, right? If your top aspect of your size class is, you know, maxing out low 40s, we probably need to go with more mid-sized presentation. So a proper selection should be made on seasonality coupled with what kind of size class water are you fishing. You know, I've often said to anglers that are going to Canada, you know, don't get comfortable with the stuff you're throwing, say, in the Northwoods or in small fish waters. You got to go big. So if you're on big fish water, really focus on these big rubber presentations more often than not. But it's a matter of appropriate size selection coupled with how do we pick from all these different options. You know, you add a kicker in where we go with, say, like this quad dog. Well, to the untrained eye, this quad dog is just an additional tail. So it's got one more tail than Medusa. Well, not necessarily. Again, this comes to running depth, where the quad dog is more weighted in the front half of this bait, and it tends to run even more downward. So yes, I trying to convey as much information, but it just you know, it's a rabbit hole. Each bait is going to have its own running depth, and each bait is going to be situationally appropriate. The easiest way, like I said, to break this down is look at the hang time, look at the general weight, because the average weight of what one of these baits will weigh is not indicative of how it's going to fall because of water resistance, again, the hydrodynamics. So often you will need more weight in these baits to run deeper. That takes me to modification. So let's say we don't have a litany of big rubber bait on hand. You know, you don't have to own hundreds of baits to be effective or to get started in the game. Just a nice kit, and you can always call the guys at the Musky Shop. There's tons of options here on how to add weight to these baits. You know, we have screw-in adjustable weights. Chaos makes a really nice deep threat that goes on these baits. So running depth, running depth, running depth, running depth, according to seasonality and how we get there, can be augmented via screw-in weights, weights that insert into this, or even adding weight in front of the bait. So keep in mind, those are all loose rules of thumb, but it's at least get you some guidelines going there as far as when do I throw these baits. Now, you know, a key to the appropriate big rubber lure selection, picking between these baits, is going to be what kind of cover and structure we're throwing at, as I mentioned before. But you might be insane if you threw a heavyweight monster Medusa in 4 feet deep weeds, right? But these companies, they do produce shallow variations of these baits as well. You can tell in this Bulldog, it has a hole in its fin that denotes as a shallow variation. So you can cope with shallow cover and structure with even gigantic rubber baits, and that'll allow you that versatility. It just muddies the water even more. As you can tell, there's a lot of elements that go into what's going on in this lure selection. To simplify the weighting equation to the best of my ability would be the heavier the bait, the faster that we need to work it to produce action, right? So a heavy bait is just going to fall. You're going to pull it and it's going to fall. It might fall at an angle, it might fall flatly. However, we need to really hit those baits heavily with our equipment, with our rod, and work them aggressively to get speed, to get a triggering action out of them. So if fish are aggressive, they're moving, they're coming off of deeper edges, they're coming off deep weed edges, they're coming off of reefs, a pounder, you know, a heavy Bulldog, the pounders, the Mega Monster Medusa, or even on just the bigger, moderate-sized baits here, that would be the ticket, because they're going to cope with speed and they're going to cope with depth, because we would be remiss to run every bait shallow. Our goal is not to run big rubber, and I think this is the key to conceptualize when you're adding big rubber to your fishing game, is that we're not trying to run these where we run all of our other baits. The goal should not be, hey, I threw a bucktail and now this is the immediate follow-up. Yes, that will work, but we can use these as probative baits to hit places most anglers are not paying attention to. Again, outside weeds and deeper edges where the muskies habitate most of the course of the day. So with that being said, there's so many options. Where do we start? Like I said, start with small seasonality and move your way up. That's a core foundational element of this. As far as picking between the brands, to me, it's 6 one, half dozen another. Whatever you're comfortable with, let the Muskies tell you what's going to be the best option. And if you're thinking regionally, you can always call the guys at the Musky Shop. They're happy to help, and they usually are pretty hipped in as to what baits are the best region to region. So let's talk about how to throw these things and be effective with them. I will start here with the big Alpha Dog. Do a little workout here. So rubber is notoriously quote unquote heavy, okay? It's not the heaviest bait there is per se in all of fishing, but dang close. So these baits take a particular cast in some capacity. A heave-ho is probably your best option, right? But I can tell you, for the physical nature of these baits, we don't want to have this thing way back here and twerk your back, right? So what we want to do, over our head, and as quick as you feel that load up on the rod, out, okay? That will help you stay in the game longer. Now, as far as a retrieve, the really basic big rubber retrieve is this sweeping motion you see I'm making, right? So I'm going to pull that bait across my body and let it fall. Pull and let it fall. What is happening subsurface with this bait? It is lunging forward, and as we paused between, that bait is falling off. I mentioned before, how do these baits fall? As I've advanced this Bulldog with my pull, it's ripping forward, the tail's undulating, and when I stop, it begins to fall, okay? So what's important is that we allow for this fall. I can tell you, in my experience, I would say we're definitely 95% of my big rubber strikes have all come on the pawls. So adding the pawls into your rubber retrieve is paramount if you want to catch more muskies. The question, and we were discussing earlier about lure selection, often is answered on what running depth or what size we want to do on the rate of fall based on the cover and structure that we're fishing. So this alpha dog, I throw this guy out here, say I'm fishing a 15-foot edge, right? I can get away with extended pulses, extended hang time. Now, I know that that bait is falling quicker than a shallow dog, but it is still falling off and it's appropriate for my depth that I'm targeting right now. What you can get out of your shallow presentations is more hang time. So in the colder months when things are moving slow or in a cold front, muskies are sluggish, you can get away with a shallow dog and come out here instead of just a slow, or excuse me, instead of a quick retrieve, we can do a slow pulse, right? Or elongated pulse, my apologies. We can really milk that pulse for as much time as we want because we know we're not dealing or contending with that rate of fall that's going to get us in trouble or get us in the bottom or get us out of the quote-unquote the strike zone, if you will. So back to just retrieval stuff. The basics being the sweep. You'll see on occasion with these big reels I'm palming. I will tell you as a guide, something I see with anglers that don't spend a lot of time with big rubber baits or they're new to big rubber baits is they typically palm the reel or hold at the trigger like we're fishing a blades or something of that nature. I find that it's super important when we're fishing big rubber, especially if you're just getting started, to start working these baits by using this foregrip, right? The reason being is we have a lot more control of that bait. If you're out here and you're really just wristing it or holding it back here, doing something funky, this is gonna allow you to have more control of the rod, right? Because we're using long rods, 9.96s in modern musky angling at this point. You're gonna have a little choke up on the rod, a little bit more control, and probably most importantly, a better chance at hooking a fish, okay? So when we're throwing this guy out here, we're making these casts, and we're pulling along here, we get hit on that pulse, we need to hit that fish extremely hard. Having your hand on the foregrip can really give you a better hook set, especially at this angle, because if you think if I'm back here and I try to set up, I'm not gonna have as much power. And the reason, excuse me, not power transference, I should say. What will happen with these baits, and let me get this guy in here real quick. What will happen with big rubber baits that'll cost people fish is here it is on the pulse. Mr. Muskie comes in, he T-bones it, he grabs a hold of this thing, and now we have to transfer power from our rod through that leader, and we need to transfer enough power to transfer these hooks into his jaw. So what you'll see is guys will make this pitch, they'll come out here, they're kind of got the rod angle down, or they got it too high or something of this nature, and they're holding it inappropriately. Come in here, they get hit by a fish, and they come up like this. That bait not only was pulled forward more so than sideways, it just is simply not powerful enough to break the lock that they have on their teeth. So we only have an instant to hook a muskie. So if you only have an instant to do it, we need to react quickly. What we're gonna need to do is transfer as much power as possible. So the best hook set I can tell you, get this guy out here as we're working the bait. Hold your foregrip. Keep that rod kind of on a level plane, slightly below chest level or rib cage level. We're working the bait in. Right, I'm squared up to the gun on the boat, working him in. When you get that hit on the pulse, pull in here and you turn, right? Turn your body, put your hips into that bait as hard as you can. That's gonna be about as powerful as you can get on a hook set when you do it in real time and at real speed to break that grasp that muskies are gonna have on this rubber to get hook penetration that we need. Now that goes back to equipment selection. You know, the reason I'm relying right now on for big rubber with this Daiwa Alexa 500, these new reels, it's a 7-1 pickup. So, you know, it'll happen, especially when I'm guiding folks that have never caught a fish on big rubber before. they'll throw the bait out. They'll make a couple rips, right? They'll come in and go, and the line will go out, or it'll move. And then they'll reel into it and the fish is there, or it's let go already. You know, you come back, well, my line moved. Obviously, we should keep an eye out. If the line does something that we didn't do to it, there's a fish. But what becomes important in this aspect is that when that slack line's there, if it starts moving, we need to quickly reel into that. So the fast pickup's important for that. You can catch them with, you know, 5-3-1. You can catch them with a low gear reel, but you're just going to be hamstrung by the fact of, say that strike comes on the pulse, you're not going to know as soon. You're going to still have to pick up that line as quickly as possible and then set the hook. So this quick pickup and staying with the bait. Now, the way I prefer to fish big rubber and what has been super effective for me is the extended pulse. Even in the summer, you'll see a lot of guys, seems like Minnesota water too, they'll just absolutely rip these things as fast as possible, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. My style has always been to give it some extra hang. Now, with that extra hang becomes the probability or the possibility for that muskie to grab that bait on the pulse more often than not. So hence the quick reel. So throw this guy out, you know, in a quick burn situation. If we're doing, you know, the crazy, you see the guys online, they're ripping rubber like this, they're in contact with that bait pretty much the entire time, right? At that point, it's just punching through the water. Now, what I can tell you, that rubber bait, whether it be a bulldog, Medusa, or whatever have you, isn't really changing depth too terribly much. If we're in contact with that bait nonstop, pop, 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 it's running on a very linear plane. The longer that you give it in hang time, it achieves more depth, right? We're talking about appropriate depth, running depth for the cover and structure we're contending with, or we're trying to cope around or contour. So unless I'm absolutely positive that muskies want big rubber and they want them high in the water column, I'm going to give it extended hang, which goes back to being situational aware. So if I come out here, 1,000, 2, 1,000, I need to be watching that line. I need to be feeling for everything, right? Steve Herbeck, a trick I've learned from him, when he does a pulse, a lot of times he'll actually grab the line. He wants to physically feel if that line changes, if any slack goes up before it transfers to the rod. So you need to be aware of that. Again, if that line takes off on its own, even in the smallest bit, set the hook. If you reel into some weight, right? In colder water scenarios, I've seen plenty of muskies come in. Here's a big bulldog on the pulse. They just stop it dead in its tracks. When you go to pick back up on that bait, if you feel anything that feels like dead weight, set the hook. When in doubt with big rubber, set the hook and set it hard. So the basics of that retrieve, to get started with big rubber, throw it out, pull it across your body, holding the foregrip, you know, from center mass to about, if you're a lefty like me, I'll go 12 on a clock face to 9 o'clock. Righty, you can reverse that and come over here. A little awkward, but still, you see what I'm saying? It's like 12 to 3, 12 to 9, whatever angle you're casting at. There's gonna be your bare bone basics as far as how to retrieve this. Now, what's cool about rubber baits, there's no wrong way to retrieve. There really isn't. I've seen muskies come up and punch these things on straight retrieves. You control bulldogs, you control Medusas. They just move water, and that's kind of the cool thing about these baits. They just displace so much water that it becomes something muskies can't resist if they're actively feeding. A point I would make about big rubber is its applications for spooky fish, right? So we talked about where we could use it a little bit, or how to use it, when to use it. Basic retrieve there. A reason I believe that it's hyper effective is this. Nothing. You hear nothing. It's one thing a lot of guys don't consider, where if we have fish that have seen a lot of presentations, every hard bait clicks and clacks. A lot of your baits make noise as they're coming through the water. These are pretty silent, okay? So in these high pressure situations, or fish that follow a bait, this is just a mass coming through the water with a lot of punch, and it's just a different scenario. There is a silent element to these baits, right? The lack of hard plastic on your big rubber jerk baits, again, makes them interesting for spooky fish or fish that are conditioned. When big rubber first came out, it was just like the introduction of a lot of these newer baits. When they hit the water, fish are just losing their minds. So if you're not adding in big rubber, you need to one thing I would say, and not to mix up the scenario even more on how to select the right big rubber baits, and the experts at the Musky Shop are going to be the best guys to ask on what this means as far as your body of water where you're targeting muskies, is all of them have different harnesses. So you can actually tune these baits. A lot of people think we're just bending them back in shape, but you can actually do a little tuning with them, right? I mentioned the material, the leader material, because I want to have the slinkiness, if you will, of a fluorocarbon leader to allow these baits to fall off at different angles when I'm using extended pause and hang time with them. But, you know, even the Bulldog here, if you'll notice, this has what they call the Pro harness inside, which is a multi-strand leader inside this body. So not only do we have different models, variations, different weighting, shallow, big, a litany of sizes, we also have internal harness differences. So my take on that is going to be a little bit more wiggle and a little bit more undulation on the pause. I wouldn't worry about this kind of harness if I'm fishing in a power style where it's just straightforward with very short pauses or no pauses at all in some capacities. But if you're fishing tricky conditions, you're fishing spooky fish, or you want something that has a lot of lively action to it, these Pro harnesses are quite interesting, okay? So I hope that helps at least understand which baits to use in the beginning points to retrieve. Again, there's no wrong way to fish them. You can pop them up, you can pop them to the side when you're working this. You know, and speaking of popping things to the side and up, that opens up tubes, right? They fall in this class, but it's entirely different retrieval style, but in my mind, they do a similar thing in some capacity. I'm going to throw in a Red October tube here. So tubes have taken off in popularity, baits like the Red October tube here and the Kraken. People have really got excited about these baits because they're catching fish. Well, why are they catching fish? The reason tubes are popular is they're a different aesthetic, which I don't believe it matters too terribly much. They're forcing anglers to fish deeper than they typically would, even if you're fishing fast. So this style of retrieve kind of dictates where this bait's running the water column. I'm gonna hop up here and show you the basics. So with the Red October tube here, we can throw this bait out and do that, you know, the basic rubber pull we discussed a minute ago. But the real way to trigger fish with this is an upward popping motion, right? So we're going to take that, and if you kind of go from your chest to an upward angle and pop that bait up. Pop up, right? And just hit something right there. Let me do a good figure eight here. That was a piece of wood. But that methodology, you can see I was ripping bulldogs over the same location. I haven't moved yet. And was hitting bottom on the pulse, right? So the running depth on tubes and Krakens is even deeper. What I personally think is most anglers are not fishing deep enough for their conditions. You look at today as high, bright sun, dead flat, calm. Very rarely would it behoove you to fish higher in the water column. So deep probative baits, right? Again, the best way to hold this rod and work your equipment when working a rubber bait of this nature, grab the foregrip, right? Pitchy mount, hits the water, up, reel on the slack, up, reel on the slack, right? You can do that really, really fast, or you can do it really slow, right? Obviously, the faster we go, the higher in the water column, right? The slower we go, the more probative, the deeper that it's going to get. Now, what will happen with tubes, just like your other big rubber baits, just like your bulldogs and Medusas, these things will get hit on the pause. So the same thing I told you before. We feel something change or the line goes out, we need to set the hook. So in this position, the way we're retrieving these baits, upward manner, it makes no sense to turn like we did to try to move it this way. So if we're moving this bait in this nature, we get that hit from a muskie on the outcast. We need to drop that rod down with a quick retrieve, or excuse me, a quick reel, down and then up and hard, right? You'll see, and there's actually videos of Jay, myself, Jim Steer, the owner of the Musky Shop, fishing this. And there's a couple times where Jim will actually get a strike kind of mid-cast, right? So he'll be working the bait like this, and we call him the tube screamer. He loves to work them fast. He'll get that strike, he'll come up, and he'll actually step back, right? Which is not the worst idea when working tubes. If you have a fish kind of in that mid zone or you're running them deep, you've got to move that rubber through their teeth. So you have that upward hook set, and you can take that lean back on them if you need to get more power. So up, 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 you feel something different, boom, right? Then we can drop the rod for control if you need to, or keep it up. Nonetheless, it's a little different methodology. However, tubes and Krakens are gonna get deeper and they're gonna run tighter to covering structure. Now, the same thing should be said about tube style baits, especially with the Kraken and the Red October tubes here. If you're not using them in the right places, you're not gonna catch muskies. So, you know, we'll take that off here and look at the Kraken here. So if the Kraken, it has a versatile weight system, so you buy one bait and it has mid, shallow, and deep, so you can take the weights out of this thing. You don't have to buy variations of these baits. You know, the front of this is hard plastic, and all you have to change is the tail section here. But with the Kraken, it allows you to fish it in all scenarios without owning multiple baits. But what we want to do is tailor our presentation to what we're fishing. And I think what I would want to convey to the utmost for you is be situationally aware of where you're fishing. You've got to understand structure, cover, and the relationship that muskies have to it with the seasonality, right? Again, if muskies are up shallow and feeding because it's warmer months, it usually does us no good to fish way outside edges, right? So we need to understand seasonality and structure and cover so we can pick our baits in the most appropriate manner. But, you know, a bait like the Kraken, like with the versatility, you can swap this out all day long. Now, I'll show you with this. Let me pop up here. With the Kraken, what differentiates a little bit between a traditional tube with this bait, same running depth, less arm fatigue, right? So you're gonna get the same action, but I'm working that bait with less pop to it. I don't have to put as much heft into it to get it moving. It's achieving on its own. That's the way that bait is weighted and sort of where its center of gravity is. So it's gonna fall here, right? So I'm getting that depth and I'm getting some action here with less fatigue. Now, the same would apply from a Kraken to a Red October tube on that hook set. Throw this guy out, working him. You know, I get the strike, drop it down, boom, up. You can take that Jim Stewart step back if you need to. All we're doing, again, we need to move that rod tip, which is gonna move those hooks into a muskie's mouth. Now, most muskie strikes on Krakens and Red October tubes are headshots. And I would say most of your big rubber bites are generally headshots. It's rare that you're gonna see one envelop it from the rear of the bait. Most of the time they're gonna take a headshot at it. So they're pretty easy to hook, but you still gotta move them. One thing I love about the Kraken, does everything rubber does, but this hard head section, which doesn't tear up for you, when we get that headshot, it slides easy. So you're getting the rubber action. The bait is actually hollowed in the inside, so it's doing what rubber baits do. You get the headshot, he grabs it. Far less resistance to get the hook set on there. So that's the basic retrieves with all those. So we can get a little more advanced, we will, I'm sure, in a future video, but something we should look at before we take it to the shop and look inside of some of these baits, because I want to delve into this. We're going to take some of these baits, we're going to cut them open, show you what's on the inside of them, what makes them tick, and talk a little bit more about their structural applications, and so you have an understanding of the inside of these baits and how to best use them. It's figure eights with big rubber, right? So with a Kraken or a tube, you know, you come into a figure eight with this bait, they're kind of anemic, right? They don't do a lot on a short leash is what I call it, right? So a rubber bait is at its best when it has whippy line that allows it to fall and do interesting things, right? So when we get to a figure eight scenario, we've been working this bait back, right? We're shortening that leash. The bait is doing less and less interesting things the closer we get to the boat. So obviously we're probably gonna need to speed things up and change things up. To get the most action out of a Kraken, what I like to do is I like to kind of base my line length out about to my last eyelet. So as I bring this guy in, I'm trying to just get a feel for what 5-6 feet of line looks like every time. So I'm not bringing it up to the rod tip like we would with, say, a bucktail. So I work this bait in, popping him in. I got a hold of the foregrip. I'm ready for a hook set at any second. I'm going to do one of my last 2 pops here by the boat. You'll typically see the bait come up, and I'm going to leave that length out, right? I'm going to leave that 4 or 5 feet of line out here, maybe even 6, and pop this bait, right? Now I have a shorter leash that's giving me more hop and action to this bait. That'll help you with your tube and Kraken figure 8s, that extra length there that's going to allow that bait to hop and skip and jump. I'll do something slightly similar with bulldogs and medusas, not as much line. I do want to give them maybe an extra couple feet than is typical, say with a blade or a crankbait. You know, I'll get this thing in on the last couple rips here and keep some line in that equation, right? Why am I doing that? So, a really good figure 8 with a bulldog, which is a straighter thing. So with the Kraken, hop, 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 swing him in the corner, let him hang. With these guys, we need a little extra rope to hang them in the corners with, if you will. You gotta hang them. So as we come into that retrieve, or we're ending that retrieve into our figure 8, we come in this, we leave that extra line, we come in, 1, 2, 3, we come on that outside corner. That bait can actually hang in the outside corner, right? Bring it up, hang, and you're gonna get your strike there, okay? When we're crossing over, it shouldn't get in your way too terribly much, but that little extra like hanging there, bring him back around, hang him, hang him, hang him. That just keeps that bait a little bit more alive. The tighter they are to that leader, you know, they're following the leader, if you will. You know, it's like the old game, follow the leader. Well, they're following the leader, which is at the rod tip, which kind of stiffens things up. We don't want to have this bait that's supposed to undulate and be crazy in the water, tightening up when we most need it. So I would say this, just like having extra line out when I'm trying to close the deal on the figure 8 with a Kraken, I will do that, like I said, with the bulldogs. So a couple feet on this in general. Something I would mention though when it comes to line length, if we're pulling muskies with, say, these alpha dogs or the mega monster medusa or quad dogs, if we're getting to the depths that these muskies are at, we're probably better off to try a deep figure 8, right? It makes no sense to try to force this fish to eat shallow that was staged mid-depth to deep, right? And I think that's lost on most people because we traditionally are doing our figure 8s high in the water column. Keep things deep. If the muskies want to be deep, why are we forcing them up, right? So keep things deep in your figure 8. Last but not least, as far as on the water here, it's the quad dog. As I mentioned before, you know, when this bait came out, a lot of people were, okay, it's a bulldog with more tails, and it's simply, that couldn't be further from the case. That different composition, the thickness of this bait, and the way they put this guy together, I think it's an interesting presentation from the standpoint of running depth, okay? So with this bait, and I'll throw her here for a second, I feel like it kind of cross-pollinates between a rubber pull bait and a vertical rip up and down bait like a tube or Kraken. So with this guy, we got a lot of tail action, right? It is a heavy bait, if you will, for its size class to give it that vertical fall. So when I'm ripping these, I'm not thinking that this bait is going to do what a bulldog does, which lunge forward and hang as it glides forward like this, or like a medusa, a little bit flatter. This is more surge and then fall straight off the cliff in some regard, right? It's got a little hang to it and then it just goes off the cliff, right? So with this bait, I've actually done well with the quad dog, upward ripping, right? And I will mix that bait up with side sweeps. So side sweep, direct fall off. Side sweep, direct fall off. And it's a really quick transition from hang time to fall, right? Not a bait that I would really target tremendously shallow things with, but it's a heck of a probative bait to get down for deep muskies. So, you know, you can mix that up again, where the bait gets up, falls like this, boom, all the weight, and we'll cut one open here in a little bit. Oh, don't cut baits up, but we're going to. All the weight in this bait is in the head, is what I believe, is what it feels like. So it's straight forward, fall down, straight forward, fall down. Less of a glidey action, as I said. So you can get away with that upward motion, throw that bad boy out, up, right? or your side sweep, either way. So it's kind of a mix-up, change-up bait. Again, I said earlier, there's no wrong way to work big rubber, right? There's some tricks and tips you can use here just to get started, but mix things up, pull that thing. Maybe every now and again you go up with it. Maybe you surge it and rip it. There's no wrong way. Get them wet, put them where the muskies are, and they're gonna work. I'll see you in the shop. All right, my dudes, we're back at the house. We're gonna talk big rubber. First, let's talk about some modifications. A lot of guys have hit up the podcast, so ask me and Jay, hey, how can I fish big rubber in super shallow areas? Say you fish a shallow river system, or you just don't have a lot of operating room. Even with a typical shallow bulldog or Medusa, you can still get into trouble. A little trick, came up with this a few years back, and I'll show you. I just call it top loading. I used to do it with the bait called the toad a lot, but you can do it with any of your rubber baits. I took the hooks off this guy already. So what we're going to attempt to do is we're going to look at the way our hooks are positioned on this bait and just invert it to the top, right? So about the distance here off of what the split ring would be, buried in the back of this Medusa, and then roughly here in the rear of the bait, I'll just go along the side of the tail, right? And for speed's sake, we have to connect these obviously, but for speed's sake, I'll just walk you through it basics here. Piece of bucktail wire. We're gonna wrap that around the nose here. You can do like a haywire twist, all right? Run it through your hooks, twist back here, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You now have a top-loaded rubber bait that's gonna be far more effective in really snaggy, shallow river systems. Some guys are fishing out of John boats in stuff that's 4 or 5 feet at deepest. Sometimes you want to use big rubber baits in the holes and pockets on a river system, but in the shallow stretches, you got to switch to something that they're not hitting just to alleviate the stress of snagging nonstop off the bottom. Now, obviously, we want to connect this. Another quick trick you can do with this, maybe you don't have bucktail wire in the boat, you can do a daisy chain of split rings. As you can see here, we could split ring this guy to this guy, then run rings from here to here. However you connect these baits, just do them off the anchor point of your nose, and that will work on any big rubber bait. And there's a really nice little trick to help you score more muskies in super shallow systems. Now, obviously modifications can be done to these baits in numerous ways. Take this is a Savage Gear alien eel. They run kind of in this different place. They're not super shallow, not super deep. They're in a mid place. Well, you can add weight to them with the Chaos Deep Threat kits. And I believe Musky Innovation makes a kit as well where you can add weights to any of these baits that simply go around your hook hangers so you can add them at any place. Now, what I've done in the past is just simply adding heavy weights. This is a big boy. This is a 3-ouncer. And add this in line, right? I could add this in the head of the bait, or I could add it to the leader. Now, typically if I'm doing inline baits, say like this rubber core sinker, you take the rubber section out, and I'm going to put my leader there and just put that around the leader because I like to keep things slinky with these baits. We talked about on the boat, the more kind of undulating side to side they have, the better. So I don't want to add the weight necessarily there. I want to have that falling in free fall in front of the leader, or excuse me, on the leader in front of the bait, so the bait still has the action I'm looking for, but it's not head weighted there. Again, if you add your add-on weights to the bottom of these baits, or say you implement like a screw-in system, if you put it in the head of the bait, it's going to fall more head down. We want to typically kind of keep that even, right? And so that brings us to the point of looking inside these baits. But first, before we go digging inside these things to have a deeper understanding of what makes them tick, let's talk about repair. It's going to happen. Here's an old beat-up bulldog clone here. Here comes Mr. Pike, right? Great. It's happened to all of us, right? We bring the bait in. Typically, you might find this in floating sometimes, which is always insulting. But let's say we get a big fish, and he comes in, and we get the bite, and he's torn the bait up, and we have a tail section missing, like this, or, it's hanging on by a thread. Okay, a couple tricks for this. Again, let's just do this. Those are Wolverine split rings. I don't want to take them off here. Let's just talk about repairing these rubber baits. There's a couple methodologies here. First is the burn method, right? Musky Shop actually sells these. They can't ship them, but they sell them at the counter. These are great lighters for melting soft plastics, repairing soft plastics. So that methodology will work. As well, they sell things that are like, this is just a generic glue, but Pro Soft Glue and Mend It Bait glues that are instant drying super glues. They tend to work very well dependent on how oily the baits are as far as the adhesives. Now, those glues, they dry very fast, especially in the outside. As long as your humidity is not an issue, they dry very fast, but you can get it on a rainy day, it's going to be a little bit tough. So I like to, if I'm dealing with rain and high humidity, I like the burn method as long as I can get somewhere dry in the boat. Maybe I've literally repaired these boats cowering up under my steering wheel at times. So how do we best repair these baits? So something I don't leave home without are parts and pieces. Piece of bucktail wire here, right? This would be easy to repair and we get a good lineup on this guy. But if it's hot and you got sticky, melting rubber pieces, it can be problematic. So what I like to do with a bucktail wire is actually make a couple guides. All right, so I'll take this. One little clip, two little clip. It's not real scientific here. They are, as you can see here, not that big. What I'll do is jam them in here. It's dirty, my hands. I was clean before we started, folks, and now I'm playing with rubber baits here. It looked like I just changed a wheel hub on the boat trailer. But I will take and make little guide wires here. Try to keep them as straight as possible and put them in the soft plastic, right? That's going to allow me to get my alignment correct and keep it that way, right? So, okay, that looks about right here. So what I will do is use these as guides. I mean, it's such a negligible amount of metal being added in here that I'm not now doing this. I've burnt myself so many times. This is something one day I went, this is stupid. There's got to be a better way. So I'm burning myself nonstop. Guide wires here. Little piece of bucktail wire coming here. I should probably be wearing a respirator. I don't want to know what's in this smoke. It's probably not good for you. That's just the risk of being a musky angler. Here we go. We got a hot bait. Let's put the fire out. I'm ruining things here in my wife's kitchen yet again. We're going to allow that to sit here and cool for a second. And by doing it that way, we were able to keep our bait pretty much squared up here. No slippage there at the end. We didn't have that side-to-side slippage of the hot bait, right? I will, if I'm doing, what I affectionately refer to here as the crack lighter repair. I'll come on the outside of this thing. Just give a little round up, if you will. Bam, back and fighting shit. And that was way easier for me than sitting here and playing with these baits of that nature. Now, the next thing they'll have to, annoying as that, we bring this bait in and they snap the tail, right? We're hanging on by a thread. If you're looking, it's here, or this pops off in the net and you're going, that's the only bulldog, or that's the only rubber jerkbait I have handy. What am I going to do? Dependent on the thickness, you can get away, again, doing the guide wire thing, right? Little piece here. You can sometimes get away with it on these, but there's not as much material to work on when it's a replacement at the tail of the bait, right? So in theory, we could line this guy up here, and this would probably work where this bait has tail thickness, but sometimes we don't have enough thickness to work with. I will tell you this. Muskies are not visual predators. In the grand scheme of things, their eyesight is poor, so this bait is more of a profile to them. It's not going to be a shame. There's no problem here if you just overlay these two. So what I'll do at times in this situation is heat one side of this tail, get it going, get this set in here, right? Lay them side to side and sort of take my butane lighter here. You can taste the bulldog. I'll get this guy going. And now we have a serviceable repair here. It's not going to win any beauty pageants, but you can get it done on the day of the water there. So anyway, I'm going to take a quick thing to wash my hands because that's covered with fishing grime. All right, guys, I had some grime on my hands from that bait. Now that happens when you have the underboss from Wreck and Rack. I have one of those under my pedestal seat in the front. I'll hang rubber baits there, and they'll get some grime on them when you're driving down the road on occasion. Little trick that I learned that drives my wife crazy is Dawn dishwashing detergent. You can actually, little warm water, a little Dawn, you can clean up your soft plastics. I'm looking here, this Toothy Tough, that grime would come off in a heartbeat with a little bit of elbow grease and some Dawn. It'll take care of it there. Well, we talked about when we were on the water, the seasonality aspects of this. How do we select the right bait? So we want shallower baits in shallower situations. It's kind of obvious, but it comes to a determining factor of speed. Now, how these baits run is less determined, I think, by their overall size, but kind of their weighting. So I'm going to do a little alien autopsy here, if you will. We're going to dig into these baits and discuss what we're seeing inside. I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit first. Red October tubes, fantastic bait. This is a super easy one here. And Jay, I'm sure, will speed this up in his editing masterfulness. Single hook, bam. So tubes we have to re-rig. And a traditional tube of this nature, a Red October tube, and this is a mid-depth. You have all the weight forward here, right? So the hook is here, the body's here. Let's get the body out of this equation. All the weight in this bait is forward, right? So the lead is here, hence the straight vertical drop-off. Bam, straight down. Bam, straight down. This bait is actually filling full of water, right? It's hollow on the inside. It hits the water, and it falls in a vertical nature. Very simple to understand. It's like any sinker you have. There's a big hunk of lead here. That's where the central mass of this bait is going to be. So when you pull it up, and then it's going to go down. Easy, easy, easy. Let's get into the interesting ones here. Let's look at a Medusa. My wife will kill me yet again. Here comes the kitchen knife, and here comes the speed run. All right, guys, there you have it. Here are the internal components on a standard Medusa. So we have a very flat weight here, kind of a keel at the top, and the wire extruded back to the back of the bait for your rear hook. You can see they've got some ridges here that kind of grab into the plastic. That really helps in the molding process. You'll see on the inside of this bait. To get that in the shot, you'll see that grabs the bait there. So this bait, with his harness this nature, is extended past the head of the bait, past the gill plate, central mass, and falls flat, right? So the weight is coming here, but the way this bait kicks, the tails grab water this way, and the flatness of this bait kind of falls flat. We talked about it on the boat. It falls flat, so it lunges forward and then falls flat in this nature, right? Boom, boom. And the tails grab some water there. We have the side extruded fins here, and that is going to be, again, a better shallow application, a better, if I was going to make the call between throwing the same weight Bulldog and Medusa over shallow weeds, I know I get a little bit more hang time, which can equal higher speeds, or a lower hang time for deeper presentations, and you've got to calibrate that on your own. But understanding kind of how that weighting takes place in this body shed some light on how this bait runs. So it's pull, and it's going to kick up in the rear of this bait past the hook hanger. There's nothing impeding it. It's catching water, and this flat bottom helps this bait plane out a little bit more. Over here to a big boy. This is the Alpha Dog. So the Alpha Dog here. I can tell you right now, that's a full wire harness. We discussed that on the boat. We're going to dig into this guy and see what's inside. there she's out. So the alpha dog harness. All right. 3 wires, a little bit more solid here. Humped head here, and it sits back. You know, in comparison to the Medusa, it sits back just a tick. We have weighting slightly off the head of the bait, and we have weighting over the rear section, right? So, weighted across the board, we have the large tail section here, which is grabbing water, again, creating the fall off, right? So more glidey here, less head down. So the way they've solved the problem. So when you look at these coming through the water, this fall off is what's happening here, right? And so that rig is a slightly different approach. Now, again, how do we unpack that? How do we address this? And what makes this differentiate from this? You know, we're comparing apples and oranges here as far as the 2 different size classes. But you can see the weight forward nature of this bait and the different body section. So we're talking about a bulldog having a more acute fall off, waiting on, say, the alpha dog here, here, and here, with a more vertical fall, a quicker drop off, coupled with, in general, if we go 1-for-1, a pounder versus a Mega Monster Medusa, the actual body size, the quote-unquote planeability, if you will, of the body differentiates where it slims out so much. So you now have, you know, a different weighting configuration, wiring configuration that's going to attribute to that quicker fall off, making it a better option on a deeper drop. Let's go to something completely different here. The Savage Gear Alien Eel. More grime on my hands, folks, playing with rubber baits. Let's take a look on the inside of this guy. Love this bait. It's a different take on the whole bulldog rubber bait Medusa experience. What most people don't know about the alien eels, they actually have a molded plastic rear section, right? So I broke this trying to get this out of this bait. But it's actually a plastic compartment there in the back of the bait, which is kind of interesting. These baits have a very, again, if we're comparing size to size, this size, standard bulldog, standard Medusa, and the alien eel, which is kind of a third option here. Very rounded, bottom flat, with the weight extended further back. So we're not that far off on a Medusa. If we look at the harness for the Medusa versus the alien eel, right? The weight is distributed further back on the alien eel and more head forward on the Medusa. Right? And typical on the bulldog, it seems like things are more forward. Again, I haven't cut every single bait I own open. They vary so much. But when I'm looking in the general way the nature of these baits undulate in the water, the weight distribution has far more to do with it, and the surface area of the bait has far more to do with how this bait reacts in the water than the tail configuration, things of that nature. So we have a kind of an ovaloid shaped bottom weight with this bar extending further back here, so the weight's distributed further across the bait, so this thing drops off and seems to glide a little bit more with a thinner profile. So that's just the take there, and it's apply it how you will. So right now, just grab the Toothy Tough here. Gonna open one of these guys up and kind of look how the folks at Toothy Tough decide to make this work. They have some wonderful split rings on these baits, about as strong as they get. Get these guys off, and then we're gonna go digging into this deal. All right, we're getting in to this bait. Now, one reason I love the Toothy Tough baits, it's not something a lot of people have been exposed to in the musky game yet. These baits are new in the grand scheme of things. How unique that harness is, right? We have 2, look like open pore weights here that are residing on some very heavy wire that has a split here, right? So that is split up. It gives the bait a ton of undulation. Now the thing that Toothy Toughs do, And they're known for, they've got this tail wag. We have this huge, huge surface area, this tail that's always moving, and it's always wagging here. Well, that makes sense when you look inside. It's a heck of a design. This thing is split in the middle, and the weight is distributed pretty evenly here. I haven't weighed it, but it doesn't matter. Just from best look here, a little bit more weight in the front, but not too terribly much in comparison to the center weight. So when that is where it's supposed to be in the bait, we've got some wag in this tail, and we've got a very flat fall. What I love about the toothy tufts is the surface area. If you look here, it's well designed. We've got a lot of surface area in the front where the majority of the weight resides. So this thing has a tremendous fall off. It has a tremendous glide in the water, utilizing that big tail. So how they're getting their action out of the bait is so different. So you look at something like that, for say the standard Medusa, and that's kind of the standard size for them in that ball game. You know, everyone has decided to attack this problem differently, and we have such different results, right? So you look at, again, you know, a bulldog harness, the Savage Gear harness, your Medusa harness, and your toothy tuft, right? And the toothy tuft harness, like I said, it's got this joint in the middle and the weight separated here for a more even fall. And it makes sense if we look back, and let's just revisit our internal weighting from our Red October tube. So if all the weight is forward in something and all the lead is forward, the only thing that's prohibiting it from falling vertically is the amount of surface area, be it the bottom section of the bait. So is it weight forward weighting and surface area to create the glide, which this has a flatter fall due to all the tails and things of that nature? Or is it evenly distributed and it catches more water this way? How you apply that and what you do with that information is up to you, but it's interesting to take a look inside of these things and learn how they're constructed so we can apply it where, you know, you look at the toothy tuft, boom, even, long, glidey fall off. We look at, say, the Medusa. They've accomplished that with the tails, where the Savage Gear or the Bulldog's going to fall off a little bit more vertically. How they weight these things matters tremendously, because at the end of the day, the plastic in these baits is not much of the weight in the grand scheme of things, and it is almost buoyant in some capacity. It doesn't have a lot of weight in the water, if you will. Let's look at one more here, and it will probably fall into the same category as the tube we were discussing on the boat, that these quad dogs fall off very vertically. Let's take a peek under the hood. All right, I just stretched that out. That is my doing. That seems like that was implemented here to really gather the material around the tail, and I apologize for bending that out. The vast majority of the weight in this bait is in the front. They have some lead here, very thin. It seems like that's more of a binder here in the tail section to prevent any splittage, but it is a little bit of weight here. Weight focused in the front of that bait. So to fall off on that bait, we're talking about the boat, very vertical. It bodes to the weighting. You can see it right there. It's no revelation per se, but it makes sense. You understand the more weight forward the construction of the bait is, the more vertical drop off you're going to get. And the last but not least, we really can't do anything with it. You look at the Kraken, the weights are external here. There's some built-in weights here that'll make it run mid-shallow and deep. That's how the rubber bait we talk about, where you can get the versatility just by unscrewing this bait. Comes with replacement weights. You can switch it out. But I thought it'd be meritorious to kind of look at that and understand what's under the hood of these baits, what makes them tick, so you can apply it a little bit better on the water. Hopefully these ideas, these concepts, and that peek under the hood helps put more big muskies in your net.